Henry Cooper, 78, a former Navy sergeant, was flying from Dallas to Washington, D.C. to return a medal that belonged to his friend who had sacrificed his life during the Vietnam War. He carried a cap with the Marine Corps emblem and a cloth bag containing a triangular folded American flag, the kind presented at military funerals. Though he had purchased an economy ticket, when asked by ground staff, Henry had willingly switched seats to accommodate an elderly passenger who needed easier access to the aisle. Of course, he had replied without hesitation, "I can sit anywhere." This change placed him near the business class section, just at the border of the first-class cabin, where the invisible line between fare classes was marked only by a subtle change in seat upholstery. Henry's hands, weathered and marked with age spots, rested gently on his knees as the plane reached cruising altitude. His eyes, still sharp despite his years, occasionally drifted to the window, perhaps seeing memories rather than clouds. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, their interactions warm but brief, with premium passengers noticeably shorter. With those in economy, when the meal service began, Henry politely asked a passing flight attendant, "Would it be possible to trade my sandwich for just a cup of coffee and some cookies? My stomach isn't what it used to be." The young female attendant barely looked at him. She quickly scanned his boarding pass and responded in a rehearsed mechanical tone, "I'm sorry, sir, this section is reserved exclusively for first-class passengers. Please return to your assigned seat in economy, where your appropriate meal service will be provided." Her words carried just enough volume for nearby passengers to hear, creating a small moment of public embarrassment. A young male passenger seated behind Henry muttered loud enough to be intentionally overheard, "Still wearing that old hat, like it's cosplay. Real heroes don't need to show off." Henry lowered his head without saying a word. He gently removed his cap, placed it on his lap, and tightened his grip on the frayed edges of his worn canvas backpack. His expression revealed nothing, but his knuckles whitened slightly as he gripped the bag containing the flag. A silent guardian of memories too heavy for most to understand. A woman across the aisle glanced at him, then quickly away, unwilling to acknowledge the quiet dignity being wounded before her. Henry sat perfectly still, his back straight despite his years, a posture formed through decades of discipline that even time couldn't bend in that moment. He wasn't asking for recognition or special treatment, just a simple cup of coffee and perhaps a moment's acknowledgement that some journeys carry purposes beyond what a ticket class could possibly indicate. Have you ever seen someone worthy being treated badly just because they didn't look the part? Comment disrespected if you believe that even a worn-out hat can carry enough honor to make people stand. Stay. The story goes deeper than that. A young man in a simple military uniform with paratrooper insignia sat in the last row of the cabin. He had been quietly observing the interaction, unlike Henry's aged appearance. This soldier, perhaps 30, carried the alert bearing of active duty. His eyes narrowed slightly as he witnessed the exchange. He stood up, saying something to a male flight attendant, then pointed toward Henry's direction. The attendant hurried to the service area, and remarkably, all 4 cabin crew members simultaneously swapped their service assignments. The atmosphere in the plane shifted, conversations dimmed as passengers sensed something unusual occurring. The passenger who had made the rude comment pulled out his phone and discreetly searched for Henry Cooper. A name he'd overheard the young soldier mention. Results appeared instantly. Henry Cooper, combat medic during the Da Nang landing operation, critically wounded while shielding 3 fellow soldiers from artillery fire. Silver Star recipient, 1968. Further down, one of the last surviving members of Echo Company, credited with saving 17 lives during an ambush that claimed 22 American soldiers. The passenger's face drained of color. He quickly closed his phone and sank lower into his seat. Meanwhile, the young soldier walked directly to the front of the plane without using the intercom. He simply whispered something into the lead flight attendant's ear. Whatever he said caused an immediate reaction. The attendant's professional composure cracked her eyes, widening in recognition. She quickly wiped away a tear, bowed her head slightly, and went to prepare a new meal tray. No announcement was made, no explanation was offered yet. Remarkably, the cabin fell completely silent. After that moment, as if the aircraft itself was holding its breath in reverence. The female attendant who had denied Henry's request stood frozen for several seconds, then walked to the galley. When she returned, her entire demeanor had transformed. She approached Henry with genuine respect in her eyes. The kind that can't be trained or faked, Mr. Cooper. She said softly, "We have a seat available in business class, if you'd be more comfortable there." Henry began to decline. He had never been one to accept special treatment, but the young soldier appeared at his side. "Sir," he said quietly, "sometimes accepting honor isn't about you. It's about those who need to give it." The words seemed to reach something deep within Henry. After a moment's consideration, he nodded and gathered his few belongings. As he moved forward through the cabin, passengers began to notice something extraordinary. Crew members were standing slightly straighter. As he passed several military veterans, among the passengers recognized the subtle shift in atmosphere that occurs when someone of significant service record is present. A child tugged her mother's sleeve, asking why everyone had gone quiet. Sometimes the mother whispered, "We're in the presence of greatness," without knowing it. Henry took the offered seat, without fanfare. The cloth bag containing the folded flag never left his hands, a connection to the friend whose medal would finally be returning home. Henry was escorted to an empty seat in the business class section. Before him appeared a complete meal service, warm towels, and a steaming cup of coffee. Not because of ticket price, but because of something that transcended any fare chart. The lead flight attendant personally served him, her hands slightly trembling. "My grandfather was in Vietnam too," she said quietly. "Echo Company, 1967 to 1969. Henry looked up sharply. "What was his name?" "Samuel Reeves." For the first time since boarding, emotion crossed Henry's weathered face. "Sammy, I knew Sammy. He carried extra medical supplies for me after my kit was destroyed." The connection hung in the air between them, a bridge across decades. "He had a photograph of you," she continued, her voice catching on the wall in his study until the day he died. "He called you the man who gave me my grandchildren." Henry's eyes glistened, but decades of containing emotion kept the tears from falling. He was a good man, brave when it counted most. An elderly passenger seated nearby slowly stood up, steadying himself on the seat in front. He approached Henry, with the careful movements of someone whose body carried invisible wounds. "Sergeant Cooper," he said, his voice barely audible above the engine noise. "I was in the medical evacuation team after you covered those men during the artillery strike. I owe you my life." The man extended his hand, which Henry took in both of his. "Williams?" Henry asked, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Timothy Williams." The man nodded, tears forming. "None of us thought you'd survive those injuries. 4 shrapnel wounds. And you still dragged Martinez to safety." The entire business class section spontaneously erupted in applause. Not the performative kind seeking attention on social media, but the profound recognition of genuine sacrifice. The young soldier in uniform approached and addressed the cabin. Clearly this man was the last one guarding the door so we could escape. Today he only asked for a simple cup of coffee, and even that was too much to offer him. Shame washed visibly over several faces, particularly the flight attendant, who had initially refused him. The passenger who had mocked Henry earlier leaned forward and whispered, his voice catching, I didn't know. I'm sorry, Henry." He merely nodded slightly. He didn't need apologies. Instead, he opened his backpack and carefully removed the triangular folded flag, placing it on his lap and gently smoothing a creased edge with reverence. "This belonged to Lieutenant James Harrison," he explained to those nearby. "We were pinned down for 3 days. By the 3rd day he had taken shrapnel in his spine. He couldn't move his legs anymore. He ordered me to leave him behind. When the extraction helicopter arrived." Henry paused, the memory visibly painful. "Even after 5 decades, his last words to me were, 'Take my medal back to my family. When this is all over, I've carried a silver star for 50 years, promising I'd return it to Arlington. When my time grew short, I think it's time now.'" The cabin fell absolutely silent. Even those who hadn't heard his words could sense the weight of the moment. A young girl seated nearby asked her mother in a stage whisper, heard by many, "Who is he, Mommy?" Her mother answered through a tight throat, "A hero. You've never seen on TV, sweetheart. The young soldier standing beside Henry's seat finally introduced himself. Staff Sergeant Michael Harrison. Sir James Harrison was my grandfather. Henry's eyes widened in disbelief. When I saw your name on the passenger manifest, during pre-boarding, the young soldier continued, I knew I had to speak with you. My grandfather's letters mentioned you many times. He wrote that if he didn't make it home, you were the one who would keep your word no matter how many years passed. Henry's weathered hands trembled slightly as he held the flag. I should have returned this sooner. No, sir, Michael replied gently. You returned it at exactly the right time. I'm escorting my mother, his daughter, to Arlington tomorrow. You've completed your mission perfectly. Sergeant, have you ever witnessed a single quiet act that made the whole room go silent? Leave just number one. When the plane landed at Reagan National Airport, Henry accepted no special privileges. He simply stood up, placed his old Marine cap back on his head with a practiced motion, and waited in line like any other passenger. The cloth bag containing the flag was tucked securely under his arm, never more than a few inches from his body. Staff Sergeant Harrison approached him quietly and asked, would you allow me to accompany you to the cemetery, sir? My grandfather, he deserves to see this flag one more time. Henry studied the young soldier's face, seeing echoes of his friend from decades past in the set of his jaw and the determination in his eyes. Your grandfather was a brave man, Henry replied. One of the best I ever served. With no further words were needed. Between them just a nod that carried half a century of promise. As they departed the plane, the entire flight crew lined up at the exit, standing at attention, a gesture typically reserved for uniformed military personnel or distinguished officials. The captain, who had heard the story from his crew, stepped out of the cockpit to shake Henry's hand. It's an honor to have you aboard, Sergeant Cooper, he said simply. Henry nodded, uncomfortable with the attention, but understanding its importance for others. As they walked through the terminal, a remarkable thing happened. Without announcement or coordination, military personnel in the airport began to notice the elderly man with the Marine cap walking alongside the uniformed staff sergeant. One by one, they stopped and saluted, not because of rank, but because of recognition. A naval officer explained quietly to confused onlookers. That's Sergeant Henry Cooper, Echo Company, Da Nang. No further explanation was needed. For those who understood a baggage claim, Henry insisted on carrying the flag himself, despite offers of assistance. I made a promise, was all he said. The next morning, as dawn broke over Arlington National Cemetery, two figures stood before a headstone in Section 60. Henry, his back straight, despite his years, performed a perfect ceremonial flag presentation to Staff Sergeant Harry. Crew received it with gloved hands. No cameras recorded this moment. No social media post would share it with the world. Just two men, generations apart, connected by duty, sacrifice, and a promise kept across 5 decades. As they walked back toward the cemetery entrance, a small group of veterans had gathered, having heard through the informal network that connects those who serve. They stood silently, heads bowed in respect as Henry passed. One stepped forward, offering his arm when he noticed Henry's slight limp, the permanent reminder of his wounds. Marines don't need help walking, Henry said with the ghost of a smile. No, sir, the veteran replied. But friends walk together. Some people once held weapons, not to fire them but to shield their comrades. When they returned home, they asked for nothing except recognition, in a glance and a seat, like everyone else. Don't let a ticket classification make us forget what matters most. Sacrifice has no price tag. A cup of coffee costs little, but sometimes an entire cabin can fall silent just to hear a uniformed officer speak 2 words. True hero. In our world of instant connectivity, we've somehow disconnected from what truly binds us. The quiet dignity of those who gave everything without expecting anything in return.
The flight attendant glanced down at his worn jacket and economy class boarding pass. I'm sorry, first class meals aren't available for your ticket type. The old man merely nodded, took off his cap with a Marine Corps emblem, and sat in silence. 2 minutes later, a uniformed officer leaned over and whispered something in the attendant's ear, and the whole cabin fell utterly still.